I first heard about Cyberpunk 2077 back in 2012. The Witcher 2 was barely a year out when I learned that CD Projekt Red, the developer of the Witcher series, was already making their next game. 8 years, a few delays, a bunch of hype, and one pandemic later, Cyberpunk 2077 finally landed on PCs and consoles everywhere. Does it live up to the hype? Let's find out. Who are we kidding? By this time, everyone already knows that Cyberpunk 2077 had a disastrous launch. It was taken off the PlayStation Store, it endured many refunds, and it was basically turned into a meme with all the documented bugs. Oh, and there's more. CDPR was later hacked. Then, the Cyberpunk 2077 and Witcher 3 source codes were auctioned off by hackers. But even with all this negative press, what is Cyberpunk 2077 like as a game? Is it a decent experience underneath all those glitches and T-poses? Or is it just one big irredeemable hot mess? I take to the dingy streets of Night City and look for answers. I'd like to start with this question. Is Cyberpunk 2077 a fully fledged RPG, or is it really just an open-world action-adventure story, like what its social media accounts indicate? The good news, I'd say, is that it's the former. Cyberpunk 2077 is based on the Cyberpunk tabletop RPG designed by Mike Pondsmith. I've never had the pleasure of experiencing the analog version, but I like the depth provided by CDPR's creation. You play as V, a small-time mercenary who dreams of making it big. The game starts as any RPG usually does, with a character creation tree. I found a limited, albeit interesting range of cosmetic features to choose from. Sex is oddly labeled as body type, but there's no option to choose how stocky or wiry V is, which is what I expect from the term body type to refer to. Anyway, the usual options are here. There's skin tone, skin type, hairstyle, hair color, eyes, eye color, etc., etc. Interestingly, you'd hardly ever see those details while playing because most of the game is shown in first person, except maybe when you look in the mirror. Even then, the game lets V wear a lot of stuff that covers those features which you painstakingly chose. V has 5 attributes and 12 skills. Each skill has a range of around 18 to 20 something perks to choose from. This provides a range of options on how to build your character. And from there, you can play several different ways. For instance, you can make a katana-wielding V who can soak up plenty of damage and bash skulls with her fists. Or you can play V as a ninja who sneaks around during missions, hacks into computers, and snipes enemies from afar. And you also have the option to make a tech specialist V who crafts legendary gear. Cyberpunk also has an RPG system similar to Elder Scrolls games, where skills level up depending on how often you use them. If you don't use a skill often enough, it won't really level up, like in real life. But as good as this system is, I think it needs a bit more refining because some skills level up faster than others, even if I'm not actively trying to level them up. The entire system also felt unbalanced because Cyberpunk felt more challenging in the beginning, when I didn't have much skills and good gear. When V got better at not being seen, sneaking and hacking my way to success became a more viable option in the middle and later quests. Admittedly, this is common among RPGs, but the issue forced me to be more confrontational during the early quests. Because of this, I initially thought that guns were the only viable approach to completing missions, and that kind of turned me off. Let's talk about Lifepath next. When I started the game, I was made to choose one of 3 character backgrounds: Street Kid, Nomad, or Corpo. During Cyberpunk 2077's seemingly never-ending hype period, this feature was said to be important. To me, the life path harkened to something used in Dragon Age Origins, where I picked my character's background and experienced these long, highly detailed prologues. But in Cyberpunk's retail release, I'm a little underwhelmed. What we got was 3 different starting points for each life path, which set up your story, but each lasted all of about 20 to 30 minutes. Once I got through the short prologues, the main story starts the exact same way no matter what life path I chose. For the rest of the game, my chosen life path occasionally manifested in dialogue options, but they didn't really change how those conversations turned out. More often than not, the outcome was the same whichever dialogue option I chose. Ugh. So, yeah, disappointing. Speaking of conversations, dialogue options in Cyberpunk 2077 feel rather limited. Apart from the few instances where I got to decide the outcome of a quest, every line I chose is mostly fluff and didn't really have an impact on the story. Cyberpunk 2077 has fewer dialogue choices than other RPGs. But that's probably because V isn't really a blank slate. He already has a defined personality, like, Geralt, the protagonist in CDPR's other RPG. Now, to be fair, it's uncommon for AAA games to have many branching dialogues where I'd frequently need to decide what to say and how to say it, and my choices would affect the narrative in a significant way. Why is it uncommon? Because Cyberpunk 2077, like other RPGs in the AAA space, is aiming for a cinematic experience where each line is voice acted. Thus, making branching dialogues that frequently let me make story-altering choices is understandably difficult, and potentially more expensive to pull off. That's not to say Cyberpunk 2077 is devoid of interesting choices, because there are notable ones here. For instance, certain decisions during this early quest can affect how a future quest plays out. How cool is that? There's this one quest that comes with so many choices on how I can approach and complete it. When I saw the flowchart for its conversations, it made my head spin. Here's another. Instead of choosing dialogue options to decide an outcome, my actions during a quest can directly affect whether a character lives or dies. Wow! To its credit, the dialogue, when it plays out, sounds like an actual human conversation. That's a testament to how good the writing is. However, my main beef with how dialogue and story-altering decisions are handled is that they're just too few and far between. Because of CDPR's years of hype, which promised us much more than what we got, I feel a bit shortchanged. As a game, how does Cyberpunk 2077 play? Is it like Grand Theft Auto? Or Call of Duty? Well, it's essentially a first-person RPG set in an open world riddled with busy work activities, like an Ubisoft sandbox game. There are chiefly main jobs which advance the main story, and side jobs that supplement the overarching narrative and introduce side characters. The variety of side activities include assault and progress side missions which have you fight a few bad guys, guns for hire gigs where you neutralize targets, search and recover gigs where you retrieve items, suspected organized crime activity missions where you need to clear an area full of thugs, agent saboteur gigs where you do spy-like missions, cyber psycho sightings which involve incapacitating cyber psychos, or like mini bosses, and wow, there's just so much more. There's a lot. You get the idea. So yeah, there's so much to do here, but not all side content are created equal, because some missions are just more fun to play than others. Assault and Progress, for instance, is just eliminating a few thugs in designated locations, and they're pretty repetitive. The Agent Saboteur missions, on the other hand, provide more diverse, less confrontational activities, which mainly involve sabotage. I had to sneak unseen into places and upload malware, install trackers, secret agent stuff. I do find it odd that some of these activities, like the tedious assault in progress missions, are marked all over the map despite being supposedly random crimes. On my first in-game day, I see these hotspots on the map. Why are they still there several days or weeks later? I would have preferred that they're not shown on the map, but then I'd be alerted by the police scanner about these crimes when I'm in the vicinity. The rest of the map is marked by places to buy guns, healing supplies, clothes, cyberdocks for upgrading V's cyberware, and other similar establishments. I'm not a fan of this setup because the map is already full of icons, even before you've explored the place. It's like an Ubisoft open world. I mean, how is V supposed to know where certain graffiti are without previously visiting that spot? To me, it feels like CDPR filled Night City with these icons and missions to artificially pad the game's length. Outside the main quests and some of the really good side quests, the rest of the icons feel like busy work. There are a couple of ways to move around Night City. On a vehicle, like cars, vans, or motorcycles, and the fast travel system, where you find specific travel nodes around the city and teleport between them. I initially preferred driving because, well, the place was a new experience. I wanted to explore the unfamiliar locations and get to know the city better. Driving got rather old pretty quickly though. Before version 1.2, the handling is pretty terrible thanks to excessive oversteer in many vehicles. The sports cars are the worst culprit, I think. They accelerate quickly, so I had less time to react. Patch 1.2 came with driving sensitivity sliders, which I turned down by about a notch or two, allowing me to minimize the extreme oversteer while keeping the vehicle responsive enough. Even now, after finishing the game, my favorite four-wheeled vehicle is Nomad V's first car, the Galena Rattler, which doesn't accelerate as quickly as a supercar, but to me it handles best among all the four-wheeled vehicles I've driven in the game. Jackie's bike is right up there too, because I hardly ever take a spill when I'm on it, and it accelerates and steers pretty well. Of course, descriptors like the best and pretty well are relative because vehicle controls are pretty floaty overall before version 1.2. It's like the streets were slathered in butter, making it hard to keep vehicles on the road. To make the driving experience worse, the minimap is zoomed in too closely, so I don't really see that far ahead. When the map shows that I need to make a turn, it's usually too late, so I frequently end up going past it. As of version 1.2, this zoomed minimap has yet to be addressed. The generic minimap in Cyberpunk is one of those things that I really dislike about AAA open worlds. Instead of keeping my eyes glued to the road, I end up looking at the minimap about 80 to 90% of the time to point me where I'm supposed to go next. I wish CDPR would implement visual cues on the road instead of on a minimap. Like Watch Dogs. Remember how they did it? Surprise, surprise! I actually like something from an Ubisoft open world. Better yet, I wish CDPR took the time to design dialogue and mission objectives with directions instead of specific map points. Instead of depending on some minimap, I'd rather listen to what characters say on where to go next, then use my noggin while I'm looking at the city map to find it. That would have really added to the immersion. So, what's it like to get into fights? It's pretty good, pretty fun, especially on higher difficulty settings. At easy and normal, combat is pretty much a cakewalk. V takes less damage and the enemies seem dumber. But at hard and very hard, Foes use smarter tactics like flanking and throwing grenades to keep me moving constantly during firefights. They're also a bit harder to kill, which is a little odd when I'm landing multiple headshots on one foe, only for them to shrug it off and keep fighting. The guns are varied and satisfying to use. Even the pistols pack weight. My most powerful weapon in my first playthrough is a pistol that I crafted and not some iconic weapon I received. One shot from that pistol, it blew the heads cleanly off several foes. Mwah! Gunplay isn't as refined as something like Call of Duty or Destiny, but it's pretty responsive and accurate. There's recoil, especially in more powerful firearms. The melee, while visceral and brutal, isn't so good due to its limited selection of moves. Plus, I found it easy enough to trick enemies to doing these moves repeatedly. Worse still, the dodging is poorly implemented prior to version 1.2. Thanks to the default controls, strafing while in a gunfight could unexpectedly trigger a dodge. If I mistakenly dodge when not fighting, I sometimes aggro combat NPCs nearby. To fix the dodging issue prior to version 1.2, I had to edit the game's config file because CDPR couldn't be bothered to include in-game option to change the key bindings. Fortunately, yes, they fixed it. 1.2 came with the option to disable double tapping to dodge. Then there's the loot, which I'm not a fan of. Cyberpunk 2077 feels a lot like a looter shooter because I'm just inundated with dozens of new weapons and clothing after every combat encounter, but they offer only incremental upgrades. For a game that highlights appearance, using the clothes with the best stats makes V look like an idiot. To look a little more put together and wear an outfit I like, I sometimes had to make sacrifices with V's stats and bonuses. I can certainly upgrade these pieces of clothing, but because new loot arrives at such a breakneck pace, I eventually gave up trying to look coordinated. There came a point where I ignored the loot because there was just so much stuff, but they were hardly ever useful, except maybe as crafting material. After gaining some experience in some much needed sneaking skills, I started trying out the stealth option, and I gotta say, it's viable, even to me. This is a surprise because I'm not a big fan of stealth missions in games, or stealth games in general, because I'm embarrassingly bad at them. I almost always just blow stuff up because I lack the patience to keep my head down. But I enjoyed my time here because if I invest in certain skills, my V does a little better at stealth. She gets aerial takedowns, faster movement while crouching, and better damage by silenced weapons, among others. When I got the ability to double jump into higher areas, keeping myself hidden became so much easier. Admittedly, that might not be the experience that hardcore stealth fans want, but to me, I really enjoy the idea that an open-world, first-person RPG offers more than one viable and satisfying way to complete missions. It lets me destroy everything in a bombastic manner, hack my way through doors and security systems, or sneak my way through without anyone seeing me. I just love it. Third option in solving conflicts is hacking, which comes in two flavors. Breach Protocol involves breaking into security systems through a minigame, and quick hacking functions like spells, which enables V to do all manner of abilities like revealing all enemies in an area, jamming their weapons, or compelling them to shoot themselves. Honestly, I didn't find the minigame fun. I mean, clicking a specific pattern of letters and numbers isn't exactly my idea of a good time. That, and it took me some time to get familiar with how everything worked. Quick hacking, on the other hand, is loads of fun because it's incredibly useful whether I'm sneaking or blasting everything that moved. In fact, it's one major factor why stealth became a fun option for me. Now I'm spoiled for options on how to tackle problems that the game throws at me. It's a good problem to have. Let me be frank. Cyberpunk 2077 didn't run very well on my aging PC, even after optimizations from the updates, including version 1.2. There were improvements, sure, especially with the latest patch, but to consistently reach more than 30 frames per second in highly populated areas, I had to make compromises with many graphical settings. That's not really surprising because the game is just dense with detail. Night City is full of different people taking selfies, painting graffiti, or just minding their own business. Food stalls and billboard ads line the streets. Some vendors have TVs in their little booths showing actual news programs. In wealthy districts, skyscrapers light the sky, each designed to connect to each other in a seemingly organic way, like in real life. In poorer areas, there's clearly urban decay and it gives Night City character and believability, like it's lived in, like a real place. Some parts of Kabuki remind me of actual streets where I live. It evokes a strong feeling of familiarity in me. Given the game's scale, it's a wonder it runs on my PC at all. But despite the lower details that my old machine is able to crank, I see beauty there because of Cyberpunk 2077's strong art design. Its smart use of colors and shadow make areas and missions memorable. And the facial expressions, oh man! In Cyberpunk 2077, faces react appropriately and show emotion, giving interactions more weight. I usually see if a person is sad or angry or even wistful, although this isn't always manifested in random pedestrians on the street. In RPGs, characters usually just stand around while you talk to them. But in Cyberpunk 2077, they move around and interact with items like eat a sandwich, push a button, or smoke a cigarette. They even change their posture while V is talking to them, like a real person does. These little details make characters feel more grounded and realistic, and it's a wonder to see. With all these things added together, the game remains a feast for the eyes, even under limited conditions. However, I can't say the same about the interface and screens that connect everything together. Everything just looks convoluted and functions in an unintuitive manner. Here are a few examples that drove me up the wall. To access the map, I press M. To exit the map and get back into the game, you'd probably think I just need to press M again, right? Because that's how maps normally work. Nope. Pressing M while in the map changes the map's view from top view to isometric. To this day, I haven't found a use for this isometric view. Does pressing escape once while viewing the map get me back into the game? Nope. Doing this just exits the map, but I'm still in the game menu. I need to press escape a second time to exit the menu and return to the game. Each time. It's so poorly thought out. Here's another. The icons. They're too small and placed too closely together, and sometimes they're annoying to click because the mouse pointer is a huge square. Another. There's a map legend that teaches me what the map icons mean, but it just makes the screen more confusing. More importantly, when I bring up the legend, the icon that tells me how to turn off the legend disappears. This might function differently on a 4K screen, I don't know, but on my 1080p monitor, it's a pain to use. Finally, there's the bad crafting menu. It's my last example because I'm kinda tired of listing down more, not because there aren't any more. Anyway, before version 1.21, crafting ammo frequently was so tedious. To craft one case of ammo, I needed to click and hold down the craft button and wait for a bar to fill up. So if I needed several cases, I had to do this for each one. After the update, I just need to hold down the craft button once. Then, I'll be asked how many I need to craft, which is much more convenient for me. I guess the bad interface design is something I should have expected in Cyberpunk 2077, because I remember disliking the interface menus for all the Witcher games. No exception. Cyberpunk 2077's audio is mostly excellent, at least until it occasionally glitches out. The voice acting is consistently good. I vaguely recall some rare clunky lines from a random person in the street, but everyone else, especially important side characters, are excellent. Let me just say, while both of V's voice actors deliver convincing performances, I'm just blown away by Keanu Reeves' performance as Johnny Silverhand. He delivers a believably selfish, angry, and obnoxious rock star who wants to take down the establishment. Yet somehow, Johnny also has touching moments that I can't get out of my head. Hats off to you, Keanu. I may not have been a big fan of yours in Bram Stoker's Dracula, but your performance here has been breathtaking. The music is great as well. I found a wide selection to choose from on the radio when I'm driving around the city, and the individual songs are really good. I particularly loved the samurai songs. The riffs are chunky, and the melodies are so catchy that I listen to them even outside the game. If there's one critique I have, it's CDPR's conscious decision to avoid synthwave in the score. To me, synthwave is an important part of the Cyberpunk experience. Cyberpunk the genre, not the game. Taking synthwave out makes the soundtrack feel incomplete. That said, I do like how CDPR threw in an eclectic mix of music genres like hip-hop, rock, rap, and punk, but it came with this electronic tinge which fits seamlessly in Night City's culture. I just wish synthwave was there to round out the game's audio landscape. Story is where the Cyberpunk 2077 experience truly shines. The very idea of having a long-dead rock star living on as a construct in the protagonist's brain is a pretty fresh concept to me for a video game narrative. Now place that in a dystopian world ruled by corporations. It's not about saving the world or changing Night City or rescuing someone. It's a quest to survive as the construct starts overriding V's consciousness, slowly killing him. And I found this pretty compelling. For a science fiction yarn, I think the overall story is easy to digest. It's not riddled with esoteric mumbo-jumbo justifying why something's happening. And yet, the story doesn't feel dumbed down. To me, it made sense. It's plausible in its futuristic world. What made Cyberpunk 2077 truly unforgettable for me are the interesting people I encountered along the way. Because as good as the main story is, and I gotta say, it's really good, especially the different epilogues, I still prefer the tale woven by the side content, because that's where I got to know the rest of the game's colorful cast of characters. I found the stories there more compelling because they felt intimate. Beyond the pedal-to-the-metal car rides, the chaotic shootouts, the mystery, weirdness, and intrigue, the characters felt like they were real people with real motivations. Game stories have gotten to me before with the feels. I'm looking at you, Walking Dead Season 1. But they've never given me goosebumps, or wistfulness, or that sense of wonder like Cyberpunk 2077 did. We can't have a proper Cyberpunk 2077 review without talking about its glitches. Much has been said about the bugs. I can speak only for myself, however, and I did encounter a considerable amount of issues, but they're nothing compared to the ones I've seen in memes, Reddit posts, and videos online. To start with, I didn't encounter my first crash until about 19 hours into the game. After an update in late December, I then experienced a series of crashes in several hours, but they never occurred again after that. I saw a T-post in-game only once, and I never had a chance to record it. One time, I saw my parked car float in mid-air, and yes, pedestrians and city features randomly pop in and out of existence even after updating to version 1.2. However, because of the deluge of glitchiness I saw online, I can't help but wonder if the occasional odd thing I see is a bug or just poor design. One time, in cyberspace, after talking briefly to Johnny, he disappears and I couldn't see where he went. I didn't see or hear any cues on where or what to do next, so I wandered around and retraced my steps for about an hour. I thought this was my game-breaking bug because I couldn't go any further. I later realized that Johnny was just nearby, but he was kinda hard to see because of the weird visual effect in cyberspace, and I had to talk to him to continue the quest. What really bothers me about Cyberpunk 2077 isn't the bugs, although there are a lot. It's really just the unfinished state that it's in. The whole experience feels like the game is rushed out the door. For instance, before version 1.2, cops spawn right behind you. This has been somewhat addressed in the latest update, where cops and police drones spawn a little further away, but it still feels silly if you gain a wanted star in an isolated area and they suddenly surround you. Even then, cops are so easy to evade. Once you're out of their sight, they give up. Here's another. After finishing the prologue, a montage shows V and Jackie on several adventures together. It would have been better if this was an actual mission or two. Or how about this one? If I parked my car in the middle of the road, cars behind me would just stop and not know how to drive around my vehicle and continue on their way. Before version 1.2, pedestrians in the area just stand or crouch in one place whenever I get into a combat encounter in the middle of the street. Since the update, people were smart enough to run for their lives when shootouts occur. Several hotfixes and patches have come out since the game's release, fixing many of the glitches, including version 1.2. But unfortunately, these haven't really made Cyberpunk 2077 feel any less incomplete. So what is Cyberpunk 2077 like as a game? Is it really as bad as its critics say? Is it an irredeemable hot mess? Well, it's certainly unfinished. It could have used a couple more years of development time to flesh out or refine certain features and hammer out all the major bugs. There are parts that'll probably stay unintuitive, like the interface, because that's how CDPR makes interfaces. However, let's get one thing straight. As good as it looks, Night City would never be as believable or as well made as a Rockstar-developed open-world game, even with the extra development time. Because CDPR is an RPG specialist. It's not that they'd never get better at other genres, because, well, they've always improved with every other game that they make. But Cyberpunk 2077 isn't the game that CDPR's hype train promised, and it probably never will be. But to me, that's okay. Because Cyberpunk 2077 is a really good game, even with its rough spots. But yeah, it's unfinished, so don't buy it yet. At this point, Cyberpunk 2077 isn't worth full price. CDPR says it's committed to fixing the game, but until all those fixes and refinements are in place, I can't recommend it wholeheartedly, unless it's on sale. Hey, if you liked this review or found it helpful, please give my video a like. If this is your first time watching my videos, I focus on RPGs. This includes reviews, impressions, some tips, and guides. If you're interested in those topics, I recommend you subscribe to my channel. If you want to be notified every time I put out another video, please click the bell button as well. What about you? How did you like Cyberpunk 2077? What platform did you play it on? I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.